You're listening to Hoedown History, where we explore the history and legends of America's old time and bluegrass music. It's a great tune with an intriguing title, and unlike many of the tunes I cover on this channel, this one is a bit unique. It's one of those tunes that just seems to keep building up momentum as it moves from one part to the next. The A part has this standard like fiddle theme, which then moves on to the B part that keeps going back and forth from the 1 to the 4 chord, and then the C section introduces this tension that just hangs on the 5 chord before it finally resolves in the D section with a flurry of quick chord changes that function as the tune's grand finale. Hangman's Reel is a mainstay in the old-time genre and a popular jam favorite, and it's been picked up by some in the bluegrass world as well. So stick around because we're going to explore the history of this tune, which has some surprising and some obscure origins. We'll even listen to some legendary recordings that have been pivotal in its development. And we'll discuss one of the musicians most responsible for popularizing this tune in America. We'll even discuss the legend behind the tune's title, and it's a classic story. So let's dive in. The person most credited in popularizing this tune in the United States today is this man, Allard, the much-loved fiddler and instrument maker from Grayson County, Virginia. Allard was born in 1917. He grew up in the Cabin Creek and Fees Ridge area of Grayson County, Virginia. His family had a small but self-sufficient farm. Growing up, music was a part of the life in the family. While his father was a teacher and a bookkeeper and traveled with a railroad supply company, his mother often sang the old ballads, and his 3 brothers played guitar and danced. While Allard had heard his family sing and play music while growing up, there wasn't a fiddle in the home, and few in the area actually owned one. But one who did was his great-uncle, George Finley. When Allard was still a young boy, he had seen a fiddle at Uncle George's house just hanging on a wall, way up high, away from the reach of children. But he was always a bit fascinated by it, even before he heard it played. Until finally the time came when he had a chance. One day when Allard was 10 years old, he and his family were out working in the cornfield they had rented from Uncle George when a big thunderstorm came rolling in. As they ran out of the field and onto the porch, Uncle George went into the house and brought the fiddle out, and he started playing. This moment would change young Albert's life forever. The way Hash tells it in a later interview, the music he heard coming out of that instrument was so overwhelming he didn't even know what he was feeling. He was so overcome he felt like running into the woods, screaming. He thought the music would, quote, run him crazy. He decided right there and then that he was going to learn to play the fiddle. The problem was his family didn't actually own one, and pretty much couldn't afford to buy one either. The family budget was a bit tight, it being around the time of the Great Depression. But Allard was obsessed. All day long and throughout that evening, all he could think about was how he could get hold of this instrument, and if he couldn't buy one, how he might possibly be able to make one for himself. Surprisingly, some inspiration would come to him when he went to bed and had a dream. In that dream, he saw himself actually crafting together a fiddle, piece by piece. The next day, before breakfast was even on the table, he went out looking for tools and materials. But the use of tools were forbidden for small children, so after he rounded them up, he had to hide them behind the granary. It wasn't a simple task. He didn't have any glue, so he had to bolt the wood pieces together using tacks and wires. And of course, he was able to make a pretty decent bow after he pulled out some of the horse's tail. A bit later on, he had to walk 6 miles on an errand to make enough nickels to buy a new set of strings. Eventually, he was able to put something together that might just work. When it was finished, he placed the bow over the strings, and he started to play. But he was quickly disappointed when, no matter how hard he bowed, the instrument wouldn't make any sound. According to Hash, at this very critical moment, an adult happened to come by, and seeing the youngster with the instrument, he quickly realized the problem and went back to his house. When the man returned shortly after, he had some rosin in his hand, and he helped tune the thing before giving it back to young Albert. At this point, Albert was on fire. He took the instrument and he ran into the house behind the large cook stove. He stayed there for a long time, sawing away until he had figured out how to play a couple of melodies. As Albert recalled of this moment, quote, "I was determined right then. It was no way anyone was going to stop me from learning to fiddle. I just slept with that fiddle. It was everything I had." Although Uncle George would be the person to ignite his passion to pick up the instrument, he would eventually learn and play music with many people in the local area, including Corbett Stamper, a prominent fiddler who lived nearby, who taught young Albert to use all four of his fingers and how to cross-tune. And eventually, he even played with the now legendary Ola Belle Reed, who was a distant cousin of Hash's and was raised not too far away. At the age of 12, he started to perform publicly. He recalled his first performance in an interview later on in life. The show was to take place at a house down the creek, owned by a red-headed preacher. When school was out, some local parents would come by to perform some plays and deliver speeches. Albert decided that he and a young friend who played guitar would play some music to go along with the show. The adults hid the two boys behind a little curtain, and their school teacher who was there instructed them that after each act of the play or speech, they would play a tune. When the show started off, things were going pretty well. Then it came time for the preacher to give a speech and lead a prayer. The two boys figured they had better have a real good one picked out for him. So, as soon as the preacher finished his solemn address, they kicked off with playing Old Molly Hare, and as fast as they could. At this point, their teacher came to them running, saying, No, not now, boys, not this time." And that was the first show Albert played publicly. Although he greatly enjoyed playing fiddle during his early years, he admitted later on that he, and most others, probably took it for granted, or even considered it of little importance at the time. He knew that many people even looked down on the fiddle, referring to the instrument as the devil's box. He would carry it around in a flour sack so people wouldn't think ill of him. But that would soon all change, as the instrument would experience a sort of revival around this time. During the 1930s, the White Top Folk Music Festival began attracting a larger and larger crowds. The First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, even attended it in 1933, and many people in the area began paying more attention to traditional music. About 12,000 people were in attendance that summer of 1933, including dignitaries from across the world. And musicians from all around had gathered to compete in the competitions. One of the main organizers of the White Top Festival recalled 50 years later seeing a shy young man at this festival with his homemade fiddle. When Albert attended the event, he didn't have to feel embarrassed about it. His homemade fiddle was even kind of a big hit, and people who had traveled from far-off cities took pictures of it. For the first time, Albert felt like his music had some importance, not just for himself, but as part of something bigger, something serious. From then on, he gained a certain confidence in what he was doing, and he began to apply himself more intensely in learning to play. In the years before World War II, his parents bought a phonograph and sent away for some records. Albert taught himself to play by listening to the Skillet Lickers, and even more importantly, from the nearby duo of Grayson and Witter. Witter lived in Crumpler, North Carolina. Grayson lived in nearby Laurel Bloomery. According to Albert himself, G.B. Grayson was his idol, and he would try to play his tunes note for note while listening to these records. Along the way, Albert eventually met the two men, and when Witter heard him play, was surprised and impressed by how much he sounded like Grayson. So much so that after Grayson's untimely death, Henry Witter hired Hash as his fiddler, and the two men played together throughout the area, touring around in Witter's Model A car along the rough country roads to a number of schools and local theaters. But the partnership would last for only about a year, when Henry's health began to decline. After this, Hash continued to play music in and around the area with a number of musicians. In 1944, when he was 27 years old, he married one Ethel Ruth Spencer, whom he had known since his school days. The couple would eventually have 2 daughters. For a while, they made their living farming, but would soon supplement their income by making and selling fiddles, which were coveted far and wide. During World War II, Albert wanted to join the Navy, but he was turned down due to a heart murmur. He still wanted to help with the war effort, so he briefly moved up to Northern Virginia, where he worked in a torpedo factory and a naval shipyard. He would eventually use these engineering skills to make all sorts of machines, including several to help him build fiddles. But he would also keep the older tradition alive by doing much of his intricate carving work with just a simple pocket knife. Albert would eventually go on and play with many other musicians throughout his life, including the White Top Mountain Boys, John Yates and the Spice Bottom Boys, and many others. He played on the radio at folk festivals, fiddlers' conventions, schools, churches, theaters, even for state governors. During the folk revival of the 60s and 70s, Albert became somewhat of a legend among old-time musicians, inspiring many who came from far and wide to hear him play. One of his most popular and influential recordings was an album he recorded between 1976 and 1983 with the White Top Mountain Band. It was entitled Volume 1, The Complete Mountain and Heritage Recordings. On track number 2, we find his version of Hangman's Reel, a tune that would go on to become one of the most popular festival tunes amongst old-time fiddlers and even be used frequently at square dances. It's simply a masterpiece of Southwest Virginia-style fiddling. While Hash's version would be picked up by countless old-time fiddlers throughout the country during the 70s and 80s, it would also even be adopted by musicians in the bluegrass world as well. Probably the person most responsible in popularizing it in this genre today is the great Brian Sutton, who recorded Hangman's in his 2007 bluegrass guitar album. Here's a live recording of Brian Sutton playing Hangman's Reel. But the question arises as to where Albert Hash actually got this tune from, and the trail seems to be pretty straightforward on this one. According to Hash's nephew, Albert learned Hangman's Reel from a 1968 recording by the Texas fiddler Bill Northcutt. It was a record entitled Old Time Hoedown. Northcutt was born on a farm in Crystal City, Texas in 1935. He picked up a fiddle in his sophomore year of high school and was largely self-taught. So here's Northcutt's version of Hangman's Reel. While Hash plays the tune in a Southwest Virginia style, Northcutt's is a bit different. It has that classic smooth Texas style, and it's pretty wonderful. So while we can't confirm that Hash learned this tune from this version, if we dig a little bit deeper, we discover that Northcutt didn't just pull this tune out of thin air either. Northcutt actually owned a music and record store, and he was an avid admirer of many styles of fiddle music, including Scottish, Irish, Swedish, and French Canadian. It would be off of one of these French Canadian records in his collection that he would come across and eventually learn his version of Hangman's reel. The specific recording was from the legendary fiddler Jean Carignan, who recorded Hangman's reel, or I should say Reel du Pendu, in the 1960s. This was one of his trademark showcase tunes, and obviously it's in a very different style from both Northcutt's and Hash's recording. Carignan was born in Lévis, Quebec in 1916. He studied under the great Quebec fiddler Joseph Allard, and in 1974 he was made a member of the Order of Canada as, quote, the greatest fiddler in North America. So here's Jean Carignan's virtuosic recording of Reel du Pendu. It's a stunning masterpiece of just intense and electrifying French-Canadian fiddling. While Carignan helped to popularize this tune in Canada, he wasn't the first one to record it. It appears that the tune was also recorded by some other famous Quebec fiddlers, namely Joseph Allard in 1928, and Isidore Soucy, who recorded it 5 times on 78s between 1927 and 1952. It was a widely known reel among French-Canadian fiddlers, and if you ever wondered about that unique rapid chord changes in the D part, you can thank the French-Canadian musical heritage on this one. What makes our search from here on out for the origins a bit difficult is the fact that there are many, many different versions and variations under the Reel du Pendu title, some of which don't even appear to be related melodically at all. But they do all feature the same tuning of A, E, A, C sharp, the scordatura or calico tuning. So while we are able to trace this tune back to some French-Canadian recordings in the 1920s, our search for any earlier origins starts to get a bit obscure. But before we look at the theories of its source, we should probably discuss that title, because it is an intriguing one. There are many variations on the legend behind the title, and I'm not going to try to verify the facts behind the story, but just tell it to you as it's been handed down through the generations. This version is from Wayne Erbson, and according to his version, the tune gets its title from a fiddler who was about to be hung. While waiting for his execution, he could see workers constructing the gallows outside his jailhouse cell. And then the prisoner noticed an old fiddle hanging on the jailhouse wall. He called the jailer over and claimed to be the best fiddler in all of the area. At first, the jailer laughed it off, dismissing the man, and soon the two got into a bit of a heated argument. Eventually, they agreed to make a bet. If the condemned man would get up on the gallows before his execution and prove to everyone beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was in fact the best fiddler, he would be set free. If he failed, he would be executed. That night, the jailer gave the prisoner the fiddle to practice on and left him alone in his cell. Unbeknownst to the jailer, the condemned man had never actually ever even touched a fiddle in his life before. But he decided this was his best chance at freedom. According to some versions of the story, the fiddle wasn't even in tune. The condemned man practiced all that night, And when morning finally came, the prisoner was escorted to the gallows where he stood up in front of the onlookers, and he played the fiddle beautifully. The tune he came up with would eventually be dubbed the Hangman's Reel. And unfortunately, the story just ends there. No one really knows if he was set free or perished after he played the tune that day. Sorry to leave you folks hanging on this one. So that's the legend behind the title. As far as any hard documented evidence of the tune's history, it appears that the earliest mention of the piece in Quebec turns up in an account by the agronomist and author Georges Bouchard, who wrote about his childhood in the latter part of the 1800s in the village of Saint-Philippe-de-Néry. He recounted how this tune was often played by the fiddler as sort of a grand finale at the end of a dance, after which the crowd would then disperse and head back home. I found two theories on the origins of Hangman's Reel. Some believe that the tune derives from an old Scottish reel entitled Greg's Pipes. It's an old number that dates back to at least the 1700s, and it's also frequently played in that scordatura tuning, as we found in Canada. I'll play both Hangman's Reel followed by Greg's Pipes, and see if you can make out any similarity. I'll admit, the first time I listened to this tune, I thought the source theory was maybe a bit weak. But when I played each part back to back, the similarities did kind of pop out. So there may be a strong case here. There is another theory, and I found this one a bit intriguing. Some believe that Hangman's Reel, or Reel du Pendu, derives from another French-American tune entitled Reel du Sauvage Perdu. Sauvage Perdu in English translates to The Lost Indian. The Lost Indian is a bit of a floater title, and there are multiple versions and variations found throughout America. But what makes this one interesting is that it was played by French-style fiddlers not in Canada, but in Louisiana. I'll play a version of this tune preceded by Hangman's Reel and see if you can make out any similarity. Personally, I hear a lot of similarity between the two tunes, but whether this tune is in fact the source of our Hangman's tune isn't clear. While there are many early references to Lost Indian in the historical record, again, there's so many versions under this title, it's almost impossible to know which one they're even talking about. But the fact that both Sauvage Perdu and Reel du Pendu derive from the French-American tradition is something to think about, and all we can do is speculate if the Acadians may have brought this tune down from Canada during the migrations. But it is a possibility. At this point, our trail for the source of Hangman's Reel goes a bit dark. But before I leave you folks, I have to share one more story about Albert Hash I came across in my research that I really loved. Albert Hash passed away in 1983. But after his passing, the Commonwealth of Virginia presented his wife Ethel with a framed copy of House Resolution Number 18. This resolution officially proclaimed a moment of silence in Albert's honor. The music he made and even the instruments he built live on, giving inspiration and joy to many today. One of the instruments Hash made had an intriguing journey. This one was recounted by one of his daughters, Audrey Hash Ham, who told how, when she was born, Albert paid the hospital bill with a fiddle he had built. After she was born, he walked 20 miles from Fees Ridge to West Jefferson to sell the fiddle for cash. Later on, when she was older, Albert described how beautiful that fiddle was, how he had carved out an Indian head on the scroll and a whole cornucopia of flowers on it. He always teased her as to how he could have traded such a fine fiddle like that for such a, quote, scrawny little runt like her. When she got older, she even made her first fiddle herself and gave it to Albert for his birthday. Upon seeing it, Albert said he would rather have had this fiddle than a brand new Cadillac. But the fiddle he sold to pay for her hospital bill went to a man named Bud Ray. He worked at the local hardware store. After Mr. Ray bought it, he took it home, and he put it away in a bedroom drawer, where it just sat there for years and years, never playing it, not even changing the strings. As time passed, when Albert's daughter was in her 30s, Bud Ray was a member of the local Episcopalian church, and one day the preacher wanted her to build a harp for the sanctuary. After she built it, she went to its dedication. When she entered the church, she saw, on top of the altar, a fiddle just lying there. It had an Indian head on the scroll and a whole cornucopia of flowers on it. It was in mint condition. Bud had just left it there, saying it was hers, and she could do whatever she wanted with it. So folks, that's all I got on Hangman's Reel. Hope you enjoyed this one, and thanks for listening.